If Iran closes this strait, the world economy will collapse in days. The world's most dangerous waterway, one stretch of water 33 kilometers wide. Every day, 21 million barrels of oil pass through it. If it closes even for 72 hours, global energy prices would spike. Within a week, tankers would be stranded. Within 10 days, major economies would grind to a halt. This is not a theoretical risk. It's an active military scenario, studied, gamed, and feared by every naval command on Earth. And the power to trigger it sits with one country, Iran. This is the Strait of Hormuz. And if it's closed, the world doesn't slow down, it crashes. The choke point of global order. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea, but in global strategy terms, it is much more than geography. It is a lifeline of the modern economy. Roughly 1 in 5 barrels of oil traded globally passes through this strait, most of it from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, and Kuwait. LNG shipments from Qatar also depend on this narrow maritime corridor. If it shuts, there is no practical substitute. Pipelines don't cover the volume, so alternate routes do not exist at the scale required. And at its narrowest point, the strait is only 33 kilometers wide, with the shipping lanes even narrower. On the northern side lies Iran. For decades, its military has warned. If provoked, closure is an option. That's not an empty threat. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy has trained explicitly for this scenario. Fast attack boats, underwater mines, land-based missile batteries, even drone swarms. In early 2025, tensions have surged again. After a failed U.S.-Iran backchannel over nuclear compliance and drone attacks in the Gulf, Iranian officials issued a veiled warning. Stability in the strait depends on respect. Oil futures spiked. Naval fleets repositioned. And for the first time since 2019, the Pentagon reactivated CENTCOM strait closure protocols. This isn't just about oil. It's about fragility of trade, energy, and diplomacy. In this documentary, we explore how a single act by Iran, whether symbolic or sustained, could trigger an economic chain reaction the world is not ready for. 1. The geography. A strait that controls the world at first glance. The Strait of Hormuz is just a natural bottleneck between two bodies of water. But in geopolitical terms, it's one of the most strategically sensitive locations on Earth. The strait is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, but only about 3 kilometers. In each direction are usable for deep draft shipping. Everything else is either too shallow or heavily monitored. On one side, Iran, with a fortified coastline, missile installations, and naval bases spread across Qeshm Island, Bandar Abbas, and the Iranian mainland. On the other, Oman and the United Arab Emirates, both aligned with Western powers and hosting US, UK, and French military installations. Every oil tanker leaving the Persian Gulf must pass through this narrow passage. That includes nearly 90% of Saudi oil exports, all of Qatar's LNG, and significant volumes from Iraq, the UAE, and Kuwait. Satellite imagery from late 2024 shows an increase in maritime patrol drones, coastal artillery emplacements, and radar jamming installations on the Iranian side. U.S. intelligence officials confirm these assets are part of a preemptive closure network, activated with minimal warning. And yet the strait remains open for now. It's kept alive by deterrence, not diplomacy. A shared understanding that any closure means immediate escalation. But the geography does not change. There are no alternate sea routes, no bypass canals, no shortcuts. If a major naval power wanted to block the Panama Canal, it would take months of planning. For Iran, closing the Strait of Hormuz could take hours, and the world knows it. 2. Iran's naval doctrine, how closure would happen. Iran doesn't need to match us firepower to control the strait. It just needs to make transit impossible, and that's exactly what its naval doctrine is designed to do. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' navy operates independently of Iran, its regular navy, and focuses almost entirely on asymmetric warfare in the Persian Gulf. Their strategy is not to win in open combat. It's to disrupt, delay, and exhaust. According to declassified CENTCOM threat assessments, Iran has the capacity to deploy over 1,000 naval mines, including smart, magnetic, and acoustic types, a fleet of fast-attack craft capable of swarming tankers and escort ships, Anti-ship cruise missiles stationed on mobile launchers along the coast, armed drones, used to harass or disable commercial vessels, submerged sensors, and signal jamming platforms. During recent exercises in 2024, IRGC units simulated targeted interdiction drills involving drone-guided swarms, radar blackouts, and mock strikes on slow-moving tankers. But perhaps most alarming, Iran doesn't need to physically close the strait to cause chaos. So a single mine or the sinking of one large tanker would create a psychological blockade. Insurance rates would spike. Shipping companies would reroute. Oil futures would surge. And that's before the first missile is even launched. Iran refers to this strategy internally as layered maritime denial. It blends visible deterrence such as ballistic missile test launches with invisible, deniable tactics. Underwater sabotage, signal spoofing, or proxy maritime militias. This doctrine is not theoretical. It's been rehearsed for decades. In short, if Iran chooses to act, it doesn't need a war declaration. It just needs a moment. 3. Global oil flow. What stops first? And where it hurts, the Strait of Hormuz carries roughly 21 million barrels of oil per day, about 20% of global oil consumption. Closure would not just tighten supply. It would rupture the system that keeps global trade and transport flowing. The first impact would be price shock. Analysts estimate Brent crude could spike from $85 to over $180 per barrel within 48 hours of a confirmed disruption. This would trigger emergency draws from us in Chinese strategic reserves, immediate halts in industrial output in oil-dependent nations, volatility in currencies pegged to petroleum stability. Within a week, refineries in Europe, South Asia, and East Africa would begin to stall. That's because many of them are specifically calibrated to process Middle Eastern crude. It's not American shale or West African blends. Countries like India and Japan, which import over 80% of their energy needs through Hormuz, would be critically exposed, according to leaked IEA simulations. India would experience rolling blackouts within 12 to 14 days of a complete shipping freeze. But it's not just about oil. Qatar's liquefied natural gas exports, most of which pass through Hormuz supply, 1/3 of Europe's winter energy market. A closure during high-demand seasons could leave entire regions of southern Europe without power or heating. Meanwhile, shipping insurance providers would suspend coverage for the Gulf region entirely, grounding hundreds of tankers in port. Even countries that don't rely directly on Gulf oil would face downstream chaos. Shipping delays in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. Fuel shortages in Africa and Southeast Asia, panic buying and market collapse in speculative trading hubs. A closure of Hormuz is not a regional issue. It's a systemic economic threat, felt globally within days. 4. Military flashpoint. What happens the moment IT closes? If Iran moves to close the Strait of Hormuz by force, by threat, or through proxy sabotage, the military response will be swift. But it may not be effective before the damage is done. The United States maintains a permanent naval presence in the region, under the Fifth Fleet headquartered in Bahrain. Carrier strike groups, drone surveillance networks, and rapid response air wings are on standby for maritime threats. France and the UK also deploy assets intermittently. But the geography favors the defender. Iran controls multiple islands: Qeshm, Abu Musa, and the Tums, which function as unsinkable missile platforms. A 2025 CENTCOM leak revealed that over 100 mobile launch systems are believed to be deployed across these islands, capable of saturating the strait with anti-ship and anti-aircraft fire. Even if Western powers attempt to reopen the strait, the timeline is uncertain. Clearing naval mines takes time. Escorting convoys requires coordination. And the legal complexity of attacking Iranian territory, even in retaliation, its own risks. Meanwhile, regional actors would be forced to choose sides. Saudi Arabia and the UAE may launch their own airstrikes. Israel might preemptively target Iranian infrastructure. China, heavily dependent on Gulf oil, could deploy maritime assets under the guise of economic protection. The U.S. wargames this scenario regularly. And in every iteration, one truth repeats. Even a temporary closure takes days to reverse, but only hours to trigger global panic. The flashpoint isn't just military. It's financial, logistical, and psychological. And it would not begin with a declaration. It would begin with a missing signal, a ship that never arrives. 5. The chain reaction. Economic collapse by sea. The modern economy is built on predictable movement of oil, of goods, of energy. The moment the Strait of Hormuz is closed, even symbolically, that predictability vanishes. Within 72 hours of a confirmed disruption, economists forecast, crude oil surges over 100%. Global shipping rates spike fourfold, port congestion from rerouting grows exponentially. Stock markets enter volatility shock mode. Insurance premiums for Gulf-related shipping become unpayable. This causes contract cancellations for oil deliveries, especially in Asian and African nations. Refining hubs in India, South Korea, and Singapore start rationing crude. Energy rationing spills into manufacturing slowdowns, export delays, and widespread inflation. But oil is just the beginning. Global food systems rely on fertilizer, much of which comes from natural gas derivatives produced in the Gulf. If LNG shipments stop, fertilizer production stalls. Agricultural output in countries from Egypt to Brazil faces immediate risk. Within 2 weeks, grain prices begin to surge. Shipping lanes reroute south around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 2 to 3 weeks per trip, destabilizing just-time logistics from Europe to Asia. Major airlines reliant on Gulf fuel hubs are grounded or rerouted. Budget carriers collapse. Energy-intensive industries, aluminium, cement, steel scale down. Developing economies are hit first, hardest, and longest. In a world already strained by inflation, debt, and supply instability, this chain reaction leads to one outcome: economic paralysis. All triggered by a narrow waterway, a geopolitical warning, and the deliberate disruption of a fragile system. The strait that binds the world in 2025, the Strait of Hormuz, is more than a maritime passage. It is a geopolitical fuse, coiled at the edge of global order. Every day, tankers pass through peacefully. Every day, the world assumes tomorrow will be the same. But beneath that assumption is a dangerous truth. This system survives on threat avoidance, not resolution. Iran has signaled time and again that closure is an option, not because it wants war, but because it understands what this strait represents: leverage. In an age of global interconnection, it takes very little to cause very much. And the Strait of Hormuz may be the most fragile link in that chain. Diplomats talk about peace. Admirals prepare for closure. And markets pray that deterrence will be enough. But history rarely warns before it breaks. If the strait closes even briefly, the 21st century's illusion of continuity collapses with it. Shipping lanes stop. Economies freeze. Conflict escalates. And the most strategic 33 kilometers of ocean in the world becomes not a route, but a red line.